Hello and welcome to Marineford TCG. My name is Joe, and this is my guide on the starter decks 23 to 28, both the decks themselves and the sealed battle event. So in this video, we're going to cover how the event works, some tips for you to win your event, the contents of all 6 decks, which is a great section for beginners especially, and then at the end, we're going to be ranking the decks for their sealed and constructed viability. And the 6 decks that we're going to be talking about, you can see them right here. These are the new arts of the leaders that you're going to get straight out the box. We've got red Shanks, green Bonney, blue Buggy, purple black Luffy, black Blackbeard, and green yellow Yamato. I think this is a really good selection. A little bit of something for everyone. So in terms of the general event information, this is going to be running at Bandai official stores and LGSs from June 6th to 27th. The dates for your LGS should be live now on the Bandai TCG Plus app by the time this video goes live, but I can't confirm, so make sure if they're not, check with your LGS whether they're running this and when they're running this. How it works, you're going to rock up, you're going to buy a deck, crack it, and play in a sealed environment, somewhat similar to pre-releases, but instead of building a deck, you've just bought your deck. That's your deck, congratulations. You obviously can't change any cards, can't take anything out, can't add anything in. This is all about using your fundamentals and your deck choice. You're also unlikely to be able to use the included booster. Each of these decks contains one booster of OP11 to just sweeten the deal a little bit. Check with your LGS, you never know, but I very much doubt they'll let you include your pulls in your deck. And this is a great event for new players. If you're a brand new player to One Piece card game, we've got revamped versions of 6 decks coming out. It's going to cheapen and make it easier to get your hands on some of the bulk, and also introduce a bunch of new cards to freshen these leaders up and provide some new interesting options. And this event in particular is great because everyone's just there to hang out, have a good time, get some new packs, and play in a light-hearted environment. So what might you need to bring? Very simple. No Don needed because the Don will be included in your starter deck. However, you will need sleeves to keep your cards fresh, a playmat to keep them from getting on the sticky table, and some dice to determine who goes first, and maybe keep track of some things like extra power or reduced cost. And for turning up, you're going to get one of these play sheets. So this is going to be a paper play sheet, but these look honestly kind of fire. Compared to the ones we got last time for this sealed battle event, these look sick, I'm not going to lie. They've got the arts that you saw on the leader cards on the previous slide, and each of them shows you all the different game areas, the character area, your life, your cost, all that stuff, which is really cool. If you're a new player, this is going to help you keep track of which cards go in which zones, which again, it's really nice that they do this for new players. Not sure if you're going to be able to get the one that you want for your leader, or if your store's stock will be limited. That's something you're going to have to ask them. I'm not an LGS owner, so I don't have those details, unfortunately. However, these look kind of clean, I'm not going to lie. I wish these were rubberized playmats. Like, I'd use one of these. These look cool. You're also going to get a little sealed pack of cards with one card in it, and it's going to be one of these 6 random cards. So, unfortunately, you're not necessarily going to get the one that's supposed to go with your deck. However, that is how they're designed. You've got one in each color to go with each starter deck, and they're not bad. The Uta is a nice buff for Red Shanks, giving him extra consistency. The Luffy is a supernova searchable 2k for Bonney. It's really nothing to write home about, though. I don't think this is a great one to include, to be honest. Mr. 1 is really good for Buggy, and this is an EVO 1 card, so this may have a value of around £1 or 2 if Buggy starts seeing success. Law is a no-brainer for Purple Black Luffy. It's a searcher. I'm quite disappointed this isn't in the deck. I know it's not in type, and they like to keep every card in the deck in the type, but they've not done that for Shanks. He's got a Luffy and an Uta in there, so I really do wish this law was in the deck to begin with. But if you are a Purple Black Luffy fan, this will be a 4-of in your constructed deck, which is nice. Onami is not guaranteed to be in Yamato anymore. It used to be, but now that we have an Ezo that does the same effect, effectively, as this Onami, and is also searchable, you may not play this, but doubling up on Banish could be kind of cute. And unfortunately, this Burgess is not very good. Nobody's playing this in Blackbeard. It's a shame. And there's also, if you win, you're going to get one of these full art versions of the cards. And these look kind of nice, I'm not going to lie. especially the Mr. 1. I'm a big fan of that. Because these are somewhat hard to come by, these cards, you never know, they might have a little bit of value. So if you can win your event, happy days. Let me know in the comments which of these is your favourite. Also, to the winner, you're going to get this. Last time, this was like a long bulk box that you could use to store your bulk. This time, it looks more like a cardboard deck box. I don't really know what to make of this. They're not very descriptive on the website. Hey, it looks kind of clean. You got the 4 Emperors here. Bonney over here, and I have to assume Yamato is on the other side. And it would be weird to leave her out. But, I mean, if this is plastic, this looks really, really nice. I expect it will be cardboard, however. Before we jump into talking about each deck in turn, here are some general notes. 7 cost Buggy is a card that says your opponent's 3 and 4 costs cannot attack. She's kind of insane, especially into Yamato, but generically into most decks. Turning off Burgess really hurts Blackbeard. Denying that 3 cost Sorrow from attacking after it ramps is not great for purple-black Luffy. And especially into Yamato, as we'll cover later. It's kind of an insane interaction. Teach turning off on plays with his leader effect. It's definitely not as crazy as it is in Constructed. In Constructed, decks are comboing off here and there. And Teach just says, no, let's just take it easy. We'll slow down. And I'll remove your stuff. In Sealed, you have way less removal in your Teach deck. And there's way less cards that you are really inclined to deny the on plays of. However, in something like a 6 cost Luffy, or even 10 cost Buggy, it's double-edged sword, that one, but denying the removal on that, pretty strong. However, into something like a Yamato deck that has not very many on plays, this effect is worthless. You're basically playing a vanilla leader against Yamato. Yamato has 26 trigger plays, which is just disgusting. That means whenever you hit into Yamato, there's a 50-50 chance that a body's coming out. And she has other triggers as well, but the trigger plays, they're the worst, man. I hate trigger plays. They're so powerful, and it's going to really let Yamato be incredibly aggressive. But if you're playing against the Yamato player, really do consider before you attack them, can I deal with an extra body? Am I going to die? 2k counts, compared to the last sealed battle event, if you were around for that one, they're way higher. Most of the decks last time were around 8. This time the average is around 10 to 12, which is pretty good. Means that all these decks are going to have the power to go the distance a bit more than they did last time, which I'm here for because nobody likes to just brick and get run out of the game. There's also more removal this time, especially in Blackbeard, but there's still not a lot, so when attacking effects, especially in the Yamato deck, are going to be stronger than you'd think if you come from a Constructed background. In Constructed, everything's getting removed, or frozen or whatever. In Sealed, it's really not the case. There's a lot of times your guys will just get to sit there and then they will get to attack. What a treat. So here are some sort of stats about these decks. I love stats. I've always been a big maths head. If you like numbers, this might make you happy. So firstly, there are no block 1 cards in these decks. That means that everything that you buy in these will survive the next rotation, which is going to be in April next year. I think it's generically just a pretty good decision from Bandai to not include rotating cards in this wave going forwards. However, it does mean that particularly the 1 cost Bonney Searcher didn't get reprinted. This card is around £1.5 to £2 in the UK. Not sure on the American price, probably a little bit higher. And it is a mandatory card in Bonney and also kind of in Green Yellow Law. So that not getting reprinted is a bit of a shame. However, there's not that much else that I'm sort of disappointed didn't get reprinted. The main other card was the promo Buggy, and they did include that one. Well done, Bandai. Big round of applause. In terms of searches, all of these decks except one have some level of search, and search is just going to increase your consistency. The more searches you have, the better. Shanks has 4, and they are an event, so no counter and no body, but still not bad. Top 5 for red hair is going to increase your consistency. Bonney has Toucan Killer, which is a new SR that we'll talk about in the deck section, and also has 4 events. Not bad. 6, you know, it's better than Shanks. Buggy has 8, which is the second best out of all the decks. 4 Mr. 3s, which is a top 4 search, and 4 events, which is also a top 4 search. It's going to enable Buggy to assemble his combos more, which he really needs as a combo deck. Luffy sadly has none, and I'll touch on this more when we get to the Luffy portion. But for me, this is one of the biggest faults with the Luffy deck. Just having no searches is a real shame. Teach has the best search in the game. He's got Fall of Feet, who's a tap search which demands your opponent deal with it, and 4 Stage, which is a search at every turn that your opponent cannot deal with. Does cost you a card, but really good power level. Teach is definitely going to be the most consistent of these decks. However, I do have some of my doubts about his power level. And the Yamato deck, it has 2 Yamato, the new SR Yamato that does a search. It's not much. It's definitely on the lower end of these. I mean, you can clearly see. But it's nice that she at least has some amount of search. In terms of bricks, fairly consistent. Shanks and Teach, they've got 6. Bonney, Buggy, and Yamato, they've all got 14. This kind of makes sense because Bonnie's going to get attacked less because of her leader effect. Buggy's leader effect forces him to trash cards, so you can just trash the bricks. And Yamato doesn't care because if the game gets really long, well, you're probably dead anyway. Luffy having 16 is a little crazy, but do remember you have Gum Gum Giant, which can then trash these. So really not bad. I think they've done generally a good job of keeping this somewhat in line. And there's certainly nothing like the Green Uta deck from last time. In terms of 2Ks, again, very consistent. I will say I have had to guess a little bit. Each of these decks has 5 new cards. And the 2 SRs are always 2-ofs. And then of the 3 other cards, one of them is a 2-of. I've seen for Bonney and for Yamato which it is. But for the other ones, the Shanks, the Blackbeard, the Luffy, and the Buggy, I've had to guess. So these numbers are my best guesses. It could go up or down by 2, but really it's nothing significant. So Shanks, Bonney, Luffy, Teach, and Yamato all have 10 2Ks. That's a good amount. In Constructed, 10 to 12 is where you see most decks settle. Buggy has 16, which is a little high, but he is trashing cards for some of his effects. So this will give you that extra defense. And do remember that the new 2Ks are also blockers as well. So those are characters that you might be more inclined to play on the board. In terms of blockers, there's a bit more variety. Shanks and Luffy both have 6. Fairly middle of the road. A little bit low. Yamato has 4, which is very low, but it makes sense for Yamato. It's an aggro deck. You're going to be far sort of less inclined to be that worried about playing out blockers to your opponent who needs blockers into Yamato. Bonney has a shed load of blockers. 16 is crazy. Combos with a leader effect well, but does contribute to a problem that I'll cover in the Bonney section, where this leader doesn't have many attackers. Buggy has 12, 8 of which are also 2Ks, and the others are that reachy blocker that you can summon off that other 2K. Yeah, I believe it's Moji. Teach has 10, fairly middle of the pack, and also worth noting that because your opponent doesn't have on-plays, they have less ways to get around your blockers as Teach. In terms of vanillas, vanillas are sort of a weird card, right? Because in pre-release, vanillas are crazy. In Constructed, vanillas are usually terrible. In Sealed, it's kind of halfway between, where they're not bad plays, but they're probably not optimal plays either. And on that note, both Bonney and Yamato have none, which is a major plus point for them. Low-key, I think Bonney wouldn't mind one, just to have another good attacker. But having all your characters being characters with effects is naturally just an advantage over vanillas. So long as those effects are good, of course. All of the other decks have 7k vanillas, Shanks, Buggy, and Teach. And 7k is an important stat line. Because some of these leaders, namely Shanks, Bonney, and Luffy, can increase their leader's base power to 7k. Meaning that a 7k vanilla who's able to swing 2 above 5, or just for free into 7, is going to be great. Shanks also has a 6k vanilla. It's alright. Buggy only has the 7k, and the same with Teach. Luffy has 12 vanillas, which is a major point against him. That's a lot of cards that don't really do anything, which is a real shame. The 8k vanilla especially, by the time you're at 6 Don, you kind of want to be playing a card that does something. Playing out a vanilla is not the best. Okay, and in the next section, we're going to go briefly over the contents of each of the decks as they come out of the box, so that you know what you're getting yourself into, and you can sort of evaluate the cards in these decks and how good they might be in the sealed format. If you do want to see the different lists, of course, timestamps are in the description, and my final thoughts and rankings will be at the end. Feel free to skip if this is not for you, but if you're a newer player who wants to learn what these cards do, this will be a great section of the video. So, firstly, a shout out to Kadi Kazoku for his deck builder. Usually, I like to use the sim because it's just more convenient for me. However, these card pictures were not in the sim. So, handily, Kadi Kazoku's deck builder has them in already. So, big ups Kadi Kazoku for that. And first, we'll talk about Shanks. Like I said, with the new cards in these decks, we don't know exactly which one of them is going to be a 2 of. Of course, the 2 SRs are 2 of. But there's one other card in each deck that's going to be a 2 of. But we don't quite know it yet for 4 of them. For Bonney and Yamato, I have seen someone post a picture, but I haven't seen anything for these. So for this deck, this is Shanks. Once per turn, you can give one of your opponent's characters or leaders minus 1000 power when they attack. This effectively gives you a free 1k every turn, which lends Shanks to a more sort of controlling playing board style of play. Not terribly aggressive, and in Constructed, he plays a lot of removal cards. However, in this format, those removal cards are not really included. But what do we have? Well, the one that I think is going to be a 2 of is this new card, Yasop. And this is a 1/1/1k, and activate main, you can give 1 rested Don to one of your leaders or characters. This enables you to just get extra value, to increase your aggression, and in fact, this Shanks build is a bit more aggressive than you would typically see from Shanks in the Constructed format. But I do think this Yasop is quite good. If you can drop this early, with there being so little removal in this format, this can be pretty powerful. You can get a lot of value out of him. This Luffy is another new card. This is a 1/2/1k. Activate main, you can rest 1 Don and his character. Give one of your opponent's characters minus 1000 power. I think this card is really, really bad. Certainly for Constructed. In Sealed, maybe it's a little better. Because it might distract a hit. But the fact that you have to use a Don as well as the rest is really poor. Especially when you compare it to this card, Hongo, who's a 3/3/2k, who you can rest and give one of your opponent's characters minus 2000 power. Of course, this does cost 3 Don, but you don't have to spend a Don to use him. So he's only 1 Don more expensive than the Luffy at base, gives twice the debuff, and then if he survives, well, we're winning. The next card is a bit of a 2-card combo. You got Bonk Punch, he's a 4/5/1k. On play, you can play Monster. And then Don X1 when attacking, this character gains 2000 power for the turn. So this, again, just helps your aggression. This guy for 1 Don swings for 8k, which is a very high number. And into some of the 7k leader effects that we're going to see as we go through these decks, Bonk Punch can actually be quite good. The Monster is a 3/4/1k. If your character Bonk Punch would be KO'd by an effect, you can instead trash Monster. This really isn't that great. Into Blackbeard specifically, this could be not quite nice because they play quite a bit of removal. Other decks don't have as much removal, but there's still pieces here and there. It's just an extra dude you can spam out at the end of the day. You can play play Bonk Punch, summon the monster, and then he can swing for 5 for just 1 Don on the next turn. Our other 4/2k is Lime Juice. This can deny a chump blocker towards the end of the game, which is pretty nice for when you're going for your lethal. There's quite a few chump blockers in some of these decks, and 4000 power is actually a decently high range for this kind of effect. Lime Juice definitely going to be pretty decent for you, although you're not going to be playing him out early on. One of the most crazy cards in this deck is Lucky Roo. So Lucky Roo is a 4/5 blocker with 1k counter, and on KO, you can KO a 6000 base power character or less that your opponent controls. Now that's just kind of crazy. As we go through these decks, you'll see this hits pretty much everything in most decks. I mean, let's take a look at the Shanks deck, for example. The only cards you can't target are the Howling Gab Vanilla and the Big Shanks, which, you know, I think is fair enough. But all these cards like Yasop or Uta or Bonk Punch, you can destroy them with Lucky Roo. This card's very, very high value, and we see that in Constructed too. We've got 4 Rockstar 4/6 vanillas and 4 Howling Gab 5/7 vanillas. These are obviously not crazy, but they are nice and statted pieces. In pre-release, I'm known for proclaiming the merits of vanillas. In Sealed, they're not as powerful, but they are still decent plays if you've got nothing better. For this Ben Beckman, this is a new card. This is a 4/5/1k. On play, you can trash 1 and KO a base 4000 power or less character. I'm not going to lie, I think this is very, very underwhelming. Can be nice at the end of the game for removing something like a chump blocker, but outside of those, most attacking characters have at least 5000 power, so this Ben Beckman doesn't really hit much, and the fact that you have to trash a card as well really does suck. Also, any character that is immune to KO, such as the Bonk Punch when the monster's on the field, well, Ben Beckman wouldn't do anything even if it could target Bonk Punch. Yasop is a great on-curve play. This is a 561k on play. Your leader gains 1000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn. This is going to give you extra defense, and this combined with the 9-cost Shanks that we'll talk about in a minute is going to sort of serve to continuously increase your leader's power so that you have to use less cards for defense. And cards like Yasop, combined with your leader effect, just give you extra value, because then your opponent's got to swing at least 6k to even try and hurt you, and then their first 6k swing is negated by your leader effect, which is pretty crazy. And the last two new cards, we have Uta and Shanks. We'll talk about Shanks first. They kind of go hand in hand. Shanks is a 9/10 brick. If your opponent has a character with 8000 base power or more, give this card in your hand -3 cost. So in this format, that's not that live. There's not that many cards in most of these decks where this gets the minus cost. But even playing this out for 9, it's not bad. And on play, if your leader is a red hair pirate or is Uta, your leader gains 2000 power until the end of your opponent's next end phase. So this is kind of like 2 Yasops in a trench coat. Buffing your leader up to 7k, obviously very, very good for your defense. Also gives you a nice 7k swing on the turn that you play the Shanks, which is pretty good. Of course, he is only a 2-of. But if you can find him, Shanks is a really powerful play. And if your opponent does have that 8000 power character, getting to play this for 6 is crazy. And this sort of combos with the Uta. Uta is a 6/4 2k. If you have a character with 10,000 power or more, give this card in your hand -4 cost. And then she's a blocker. So if you don't meet this condition, this card is really quite bad, but it's still a 2k, so you can counter with it. It's not too bad. However, if you do meet this condition, this is a 2/4 blocker that's a 2k. That's a really efficient stat line. 2/4 blocker is great. It's like a chump blocker, but it also has the ability to swing into your opponent for just that 1 Don cost, which is strong. And being a 2k, you know, that's always pretty good. And in terms of our consistency, we've got 4 of the Come On We'll Fight You. Just a top 5 search for red hair pirates. Sadly, can't grab the Uta. And also can't grab this Luffy, although I'm not that sad about that one. But can grab everything else in your deck. You're never going to whiff on this, unless you find all the other Come On We'll Fight Yous. And also has Trigger Draw a card, so if your opponent's going for lethal, it's at least not a guaranteed brick coming out to play. Overall, I think the Shanks deck has a very strong defense, not that strong an offense, but that's not what he's about. Shanks is all about defense, grinding your opponent out, and getting there in the late game. There's not that many bad cards in this deck, really only the Luffy and maybe the Ben, but at least Ben is a 4/5, he's not got the worst stat line in the world. It's really only the Luffy in this deck that I think is a bad card. Everything else I think you will get some value out of across your tournament. And I think Shanks is certainly a decent pick if you like a bit more of a defensive playstyle. Next up, we've got Jewelry Bonney, and the core identity of a Jewelry Bonney deck in Constructed is to lengthen the game by the use of your leader effect to get out of your opponent's aggression, develop characters that advance your board in meaningful ways, and get towards your usually very powerful top-end cards, such as the 8-cost Kid and the 10-cost Doflamingo. However, in this sealed format, the Bonney deck doesn't have much of a payoff. You have a lot of low-power characters, and you have a lot of like utility blockers, but you don't have many attackers, and I find it a little concerning. So, Jewelry Bonney's leader effect, if you're not aware, you can, on your opponent's attack once per turn, rest 1 Don, and rest one of your opponent's leaders or characters. So you have to leave 1 Don open, but you can get out of any swing, in theory, and that's pretty powerful. Getting out of 1 swing for free per turn, it's no joke, right? And we have some ways to enable this so that you don't have to leave Dons open for this effect. For example, we have a Rouge. A Rouge is a 4/5 blocker with 1k counter, and then at the end of your turn, you set 1 Don as active, which is great for fulfilling your leader condition. A Rouge is a pretty standard card in Bonney. You've seen it off and on in Bonney lists, but it's quite often in Bonney, and it's a good card to combo with your leader effect. We also have this new card, Basil Hawkins. He's a 4/4 2K, which does the same thing. Now, in the sealed format, there is no reason to stack these. We're not playing counter events, and you can only use this effect once per turn. So if you have an Arouge, you don't need a Basil Hawkins. However, it's nice to have redundancy, right? Always good. We also have a lot of other blockers. We've got the Bartolomeo blocker, who is the 3/4 1K, and in your turn, when you rest a character by an effect, you get to draw one trash one. Not advantage, but cycle is always nice. We also have this new Bedge blocker. He's a 2/1 1K, and on play, if you have 6 or more rested cards, which includes Don, characters, leaders, anything else, you get to draw one trash one. Again, no advantage, but cycle's no joke. We also have this Caribou blocker. He's a 4/5 1K, and if you have 6 or more rested Don cards, this character gains 1000 power. And this is actually one of the better attackers in the deck, because he is at least above 5000 power. There's a lot of cards in this deck that sadly don't meet that requirement. And this is not bad, and can also be cheated off this Caribou. And this Caribou is horrible. 3/3 brick is particularly nasty. But on play, you can play a 4-cost Caribou. So in theory, on 3 Don, you can play this, and he summons this. It's a 2-card combo, which in sealed is not the easiest to pull off. And this card, if you don't have the Caribou, this sucks. This is really, really bad. But we do have a couple ways to put those combos together. We've got the More Pizza event, which is a top 5 search for Supernova. Nothing funky. And we also have this new Kidden Killer. He's a 2/2 1K that is a top 5 search for Supernovas. And on your opponent's attack, you can trash him to resound 1 Don. So if you haven't managed to establish something like an Arouge, and you need to use your leader effect, well, you can just get rid of Kidden Killer, which is kind of a nice little bonus on top of being a good searcher. In terms of our big payoff, it's this guy, and this card is powerful. This is a 10/11 Lauren Beppo. On play, rest up to one of your opponent's characters. Then, that character will not become active during your opponent's next refresh phase. Then, if your opponent has 2 or more rested characters, your leader gains 2000 power until the end of your opponent's next end phase. So this is really, really nice on defense. It denies one of your opponent's characters from swinging, even if that character was previously stood up. And then it buffs your leader by 2k, which is obviously very good. However, this is a 10 cost, which means unless you have an Arouge on the board or something similar, you can't then use your leader effect. And also, it's very late game. You've got to get there, and it's a 2-of. We should be able to find this, but there's only 2 of them. But if you can get evens and then establish this card on 10, it's very powerful. Getting a 10/11 down is no joke. In terms of other attackers in this deck, well, we've got this Luffy. He's a 5/6 1K. And he says if you have 3 or more characters, your characters with a cost of 3 or less other than himself cannot be KO'd by your opponent's effects. This could be okay in something like Blackbeard. It forces them to remove this Luffy first before removing anything else. But honestly, this is one of the more threatening characters, so it's probably going to be one of the priority targets anyway. So I'm not sure how good this effect is, but it is a 5/6 1K. Could be worse. We also have X-Drake, who is a 2k and a 5/5. This is a new card. On play, if your leader is a Supernova, you get to rest a 5. And then at the end of your turn, you get to set 1 Don as active. It's not bad. Can get a bit of a starve, maybe rest something like a chump blocker to let you just take that out so that your opponent doesn't have it later on. Or just rest a meaningful character and attack into it with your leader. It's okay. And then fulfills your leader effect at the end of the turn, which lets you swing with all your Don. This is also a 2k, which is nice. And the final 2k is this Apu. His effect is just rest a 2. It's not great, but can, again, rest a chump blocker. The last cards in this deck, we've got the 1/2 1k Roronoa Zoro. When attacking, if you have 3 or more characters, this character gains 2000 power for the turn. So this is a 1/4 when attacking, which is good, but you still have to sort of give something to him to get him to even swing for 5, which is a little tough, and he's very, very easy to remove on the defense, and requires you to have a big board, which I'm not sure Bonney's going to manage. Your characters are just not very strong. And the last card is the event with the really long name, Demon 9 Flash. I like to call this one. This is a 2 Don event. You give something 3000 power for the turn. Then you rest one of your 3 or higher characters. Can I say Caribou is a very, very nice target to rest. And then you get to rest one of your opponent's 5 cost or lower characters. So this is very good for going for game. You buff something up, rest a blocker, simple as. Swing through, hopefully we win. And you got 4 of these, which is a little bit excessive, honestly. But it is a strong card. Overall, I think Bonney has some pretty good defense here with all these blockers. And that Law and Beppo is a really nice payoff. But holy, this deck does not have many good attackers. You got the Luffy, maybe the Zoro, and then like this Caribou and the 2K Drake. It's really not looking too hot, which is a real shame because the Bonney deck is a fun deck. A lot of people love Bonney, and I've got to feel that for the sealed event specifically, just like last time, Green's kind of been dealt a rough hand. Next up, we've got the Buggy starter deck, and this blue starter deck is based all around spamming your board with multiple characters to go wide and build up to your big 10-cost Buggy boss monster. So Buggy's leader effect is you can activate main, rest 5 Don cards and trash 1 card from your hand. Then you can play any cross-skilled character from your hand, no matter the cost. That's right, you can play a 10 cost for just 5 Don and 1 card. You can get some pretty crazy value out of Buggy if you're able to fill the board enough to get towards your boss monster, and we'll cover him first. That's the 10 cost Buggy. So this is a 10-12 brick on play, put one of your opponent's characters at the bottom of their deck. Insane. Then, if you do not have 5 characters with a cost of 5 or more, and that will include this Buggy himself, this character goes to the bottom of your deck. So if he's not surrounded by strong crew members, Buggy in true cowardly fashion runs away. However, if he's surrounded by his homies, this guy's insane. The power on this card is very, very high. You've just got to build the board to get there. And how are you going to do that? Well, we have 2 characters in this deck that play out other characters. We've got the Buggy, who is a 7/8 that cannot attack. However, if your leader is Buggy, all 3 and 4 cost characters cannot attack. So this is a floodgate that turns off so many things into both the Bonney deck and the Yamato deck. This card is nuts. So many of their attackers cost 3 or 4, especially Yamato. Yamato has like a crazy amount of like 4 costs that are attackers, and Buggy's just like, no, you can't attack. Cheers, mate. Also into Blackbeard, this turns off their Jesus Burgess, which is their main attacker. And it's just incredibly strong because there's a very low chance your opponent can actually deal with this card by hard removal because there's such little hard removal in the sealed format. So, and then this Buggy on play, you get to play 1 6-cost or lower cross-skilled character from your hand, which is every character in your deck except these last 3. We'll go over our other summoner, and then we'll talk about some of the summons. So this is a new card. This is an 8/7 Crocodile and Mihawk. On play, draw 2, trash 1. Then play a 4-cost or lower cross-skilled character from your hand. And then once per turn, if your cross-skilled type character will be removed from the field by an opponent's effect, you can instead trash 1 card. So you might be thinking, well, this only plays a 4, and Buggy needs 5s. Well, I'll let you in on a secret. All of the 4s in this deck effectively make themselves 5 costs. We'll talk about that later. But this Crocodile replacing himself in hand with that draw 2, trash 1, and getting that cycle to dig you close to good targets, and the fact this does it before playing a guy as well, is very, very good. This combined with your Buggy is going to let you go wide fast. And remember, these don't cost 8 and 7. These cost 5 with your leader effect. So in terms of the summons, what might we play? Well, we've got some new 2Ks that are also blockers. And again, I'm not sure which of these 3 new cards is Kabuji, Alvida, and Moji. Which of these is going to be a 2 of. My gut says it's Alvida because these 2 are very similar. But I'm not 100%. This Moji and this Kabuji are both 4/1 2K blockers if you have 2 or more characters at the base cost of 5 or more. They gain the blocker and then +1 cost, making them 5 costs to fulfill Buggy's effect. Kabuji, in your opponent's turn, gains 5,000 power. So he can't attack, but he's pretty good on defense. He's a 6K blocker. Moji, on the other hand, on KO, if your leader is Buggy and you have 3 or less cards in your hand, you get to draw 1. He's a 2K chump blocker that draws a card, helping you out with your card efficiency, whilst getting you out of a hit for free. Alvida is your 3rd target for 4. And she has the same effect where if you have 2 or more characters with a base cost of 5 or more, she gains +1 cost. And on play, if your leader is Buggy, draw 3 trash 2. So if you play Crocodile and Mihawk into Alvida, you've only gone -1 in hand. That was the card you trashed with your leader effect to play the Crocodile and Mihawk. Because he replaces himself, she replaces herself, you've had a draw 5, trash 3, you get so much dig with this combo, it's crazy and constructed, and this will be really helpful for your consistency in a sealed environment, where everything's a bit more bricky, obviously so long as you can find these cards. In terms of the rest of the summons, we've got this 4/1 1k Buggy. You can activate main, trash 1 card and him, and then you get to play a 6 cost or less cross-skilled character from your hand. This card in sealed, I think is even worse than this card in constructed. You'll notice there are no 6 costs in this deck. So you're cheating 1 Don. That's really not worth the 1 card in my opinion, especially when we have like good 4 costs. This could come up in a pinch. If you don't have any of these and you're playing Crocodile and Mihawk, you can summon Buggy and then turn him into one of these 5s that we're about to talk about. But this is really underwhelming for an SR. We've got Alvida, who's a 5/6 1k on KO. If your leader has a cross-skilled type, we get to play 1 5 cost or lower character other than Alvida from our hand. So this works by effect and also by battle. So if you attack with Alvida, your opponent gets rid of her, you can summon something back. You could summon one of these next 3 targets that we're about to talk about, or any of those 4 costs. Kabaji and Moji are both very underwhelming 2Ks. Kabaji becomes immune to battle damage when you have a Buggy character in play, which we do have 8. If you have this one in play, Kabaji's not that bad. It just kind of can't be removed, especially if you have the Croc Hawk in play. Stop removal by effects. Moji looks at the top 5 for Ricci and then plays Ricci, similar to the Ohm Holy combo. And Ricci's this guy here, he's just a 2/2 chump blocker. You don't really want him on your board, because obviously he'll turn off your Buggy's effect. But he's happy to block and leave. And then your Moji is a 5/5 body. And then the last 5 cost is this vanilla Mr. One Daz Bones. He's fine. Good stat line for the stats. And if you're playing this off the 7 cost Buggy, not the worst play in the world. In terms of our consistency, we've got 2 searches in this deck. We've got a Mr. 3 who searches the top 4 for Cross Guild or Baroque Works, which searches the entire deck other than himself. And we've got Cross Guild, which is a top 4 event searcher for Cross Guild, and it has Trigger Activate main. This again searches the whole deck except for itself. I think the Buggy deck, whilst missing a couple of key pieces, could be an incredibly powerful deck for this format. Having access to this 7 cost Buggy at 4 copies with all the consistency that this deck has is really going to let you shut down your opponent really quickly, especially into some decks like Yamato. When we get to the Yamato deck breakdown, you'll see how many 4 costs are in that deck. It's kind of disgusting. But yeah, this Buggy incredibly powerful into that, and I think generally is going to be very strong. And the rest of the supporting cast is no laughing matter. You've got the 10 cost at 4 copies, which is incredible to deal with any boss monsters that your opponent might bring out. Between this Buggy and this Croc Hawk countering removal, I think Buggy is an incredibly strong deck for this format, especially with how many like 2Ks he's got, right? Look, 16 2Ks. That's crazy. The Purple Black Luffy deck is one that's based all around ramping to your powerful boss characters and using cards like Gum Gum Giant and Lightning to have some very efficient removal and counter. This deck is a bit of a jack of all trades. Not the strongest offense, nor the strongest defense, but pretty good at everything. So Luffy's leader effect is twofold. Firstly, Don X1, all your characters gain +1 cost. This is going to make it a little better into some removal and resting pieces that are based on cost. And he also has your turn once per turn. When 2 or more Don cards on your field are returned to your Don deck, you get to ramp 1 Don as active and 1 Don as rested, effectively undoing that cost, which is really nice, and restanding 1 Don. So you get a bit of extra value. This deck, as you can imagine, is a ramp deck, and we have 2 rampers in this deck. We've got this 3/5 Zoro who, on play, you can return 1 or more. It's going to be 2 Don from your field to your Don deck. Then he ramps 1 as active. This, combined with your leader effect, is going to ramp 1 as active with Zoro, 1 as active with the leader effect, and 1 as rested with the leader effect. So you'll be 1 Don higher than when you played the Zoro, and you'll have 2 active. The other ramper is a new card, this Robin. She's a 3/4 2k. On play, Don -2. Ramp 1 Don is active. It's exactly the same as the Zoro. Has 1k less power, but has 2k counter. That's a pretty good trade-off. Your ideal play on this 3 Don turn is going to be the Zoro every single time. However, if you get the Robin, it's really no bad thing. Having 6 ramp in a starter deck, I think is generically quite good. It's going to get you towards that late game stronger. And then we have a fair few decently high power characters that we can play out. The new boss monster for this deck is this 6/7 Luffy. Both on play and when attacking, you can do Don -2. If your leader is multicolored, which we are, and your opponent has 5 or more Don on their field, so you can't do this on 6 if you ramped from 3, your Straw Hat Crew leader's base power becomes 7,000 power until the end of your opponent's next end phase. This is going to really help with your defense, which as a 4-life leader, we really need that defense. Drawing this card is going to be very, very important for this Luffy deck because it's relatively hard to remove, being a 7 cost with your leader's effect. However, we don't have searchers in the purple black Luffy deck. No 1-cost lore, no when you're at sea you can fight against pirates, not even a Zoro. This is honestly one of the biggest downsides of the purple black Luffy deck, is the 4 life and the fact that your really important pieces are not searchable, which is a real shame. However, if you can draw this guy, especially on curve, it's going to get you some nuts value. Being 7k every turn that's nuts. You don't need me to tell you that. So what else are we ramping to? Well, you can ramp to a vanilla. We have 12 of them, sadly. We have the 4-cost vanilla Usopp. We've got the 5-cost vanilla Brook. And we've got the 6-cost vanilla Sangoro. 12 vanillas is a bit disappointing. These cards obviously don't do very much. Having no effect on the turn they come down. I understand if you're already doing the Don -2 with this. You only proc your leader effect once. Having quite so many vanillas is a little underwhelming. You could do Jinbei. He's a blocker, and on your opponent's turn, if you have 10 Don cards on the field, he gains 1,000 power, which is okay. It's just like a slightly large blocker. Really nothing to write home about. And then we have the new cards. So you've got this Sober Mask. He's a 7/9 brick. If you have a Sangoro or Sanji character with 7,000 base power or more, give this card in your hand at -5 cost. So this becomes a 2/9 if you have this guy on the board. And that's sort of a bit of a problem, because it first means you've got to play this guy, which we're not thrilled to do. And then you've got to play this guy, and his on-play is return all of your Sangoro and Sanji characters to your hand. So then you lose your vanilla. This card's very underwhelming. Into Blackbeard specifically, because this on-play does not fire if they turn them off, it's actually very good. But outside of that matchup, this is going to sit in your hand, and he's going to become a brick. However, we can trash it with this card that we'll talk about in a minute. Our other big boss monster is General Frankie. He's an 8/10, and on play you can do Don -2, give 2 things -2,000 power. So if you've managed to secure a bit of a board, this coming down procs your leader effect, and then is going to make it easier for your leader and characters to clear your opponent's dudes. However, this is very expensive. An 8/10 with this effect is not bad, but it's not great either, and this is your entire turn if you're doing this. You're not playing multiple characters. You're not really swinging for much other than your leader and character's base power. If you've already got this Luffy on the board, it's going to be a pretty good play, but then you're doing 2 Don -2s, so it's a bit tricky. I think this card overall is going to be strong, but a little bit underwhelming. Especially because if your opponent doesn't have any tapped characters, this is just a vanilla. The final new card we're getting in this deck is this Chopper, and I think this is going to be the 2 of. That's just what my gut tells me anyway. This is a 3/4 1k blocker. On play, you can do Don -2, rest one of your opponent's Don cards, or a 1-cost character. In the sealed format specifically, resting a 1-cost irrelevant, so you're really resting a Don, and there are a few decent counter events in this format, especially Gum Gum Giant in Mirrors. Gum Gum Giant, 1-cost event, Don -2, trash 1, buff your leader for 4k, and then draw 2. This replaces itself and is a trash 1 draw 2. Very, very crazy card. And the fact that you get 4 copies of this, I think is what's going to sort of make up for Luffy's lack of search and 4 life total. This drawing a couple cards in your opponent's turn to refresh your hand and give you a better play for next turn potentially is very strong. However, one thing to consider with this is there are 22 bricks. Yes, this includes Gum Gum Giant, and that does mean that your Gum Gum Giant's always going to have a brick to trash. But your counter overall is going to be a little bit lower with this deck, so you may be forced to use Gum Gum Giant at times when you don't really want to do the Dom -2. And remember, this Dom -2 will not proc your leader effect, because this is only in your turn. The other event we have is a removal type card. Dom -2, KO one of your opponent's characters with 6,000 power or less. And then remember, that procs your leader effect, so you get one of those back as active and one of those back as rested. This is a very, very efficient event. Getting to remove anything 6,000 power or less for just 2 Dom is obviously great value. You do lose a card and it does burn your leader's effect, but realistically, if you're getting this off at a good time, it could really swing the tide of battle. Especially if you can follow this up with even just a vanilla. If you can remove your opponent's play and then develop your own, I mean, that's a great turn, right? In terms of 2Ks, this deck has 10. We've got 2 of the Robin that we talked about earlier. We've got 4 of this Nami, and this Nami's effect is very, very bad. You're never really going to want to play this out. It's just very poor. And we've also got Franosuke, whose effect is quite bad. But it is Rush, and in Sealed, you never know. Rush can come up when you least expect it. So Franosuke, really not the worst. Overall, this Luffy deck, I think, is a bit of a mixed bag. It's got very strong power cards in realistically just this Luffy. But the fact that he's not searchable is a real downside. And the fact that you have 22 bricks is going to mean that if you don't draw into your Gum Gum Giant, you're in a pretty tough spot. Blackbeard is a removal and control heavy deck that relies on denying your opponent what they want to do and removing their characters with efficient bodies whilst having an incredible amount of consistency due to our searchers and building up to massive Jesus Burgesses by putting a lot of cards in our trash. So in Constructed, Blackbeard is very strong, and in Constructed this plays a little differently because you aim to get towards your big 10 cost Blackbeard blocker. However, in this format we don't have access to the 10 cost Blackbeard blocker, so you're going to need to control your opponent's board even more so that you don't get run out of the game towards that end game. So your leader effect is that your on-play effects do not activate. However, you can activate main, trash 1 card from your hand, and then your opponent's on-play effects do not activate for their next turn. So this sort of works in that your deck is obviously built to not have any on-play effects. Your opponent's deck will be built to have on-play effects, because on-play effects are some of the most strongest in the game. So Blackbeard denying your opponent's on-plays in crucial turns could be very big. There's definitely a learning curve with this. If you just spam this effect every turn, then you're just going to run out of cards. You need to know which turns you need to do this, and which turns you don't. So this is not a deck I would recommend for beginner players at an event like this. However, if you know when to do this effect, you can get some crazy value. And this deck is sort of all built around enabling Jesus Burgess. He's a 4/5/1k that cannot be KO'd by your opponent's effects. And if your leader has the Blackbeard Pirates type, this character gains 1,000 power for every 4 cards in your trash. So if you build up 12 cards in the trash, this is a 4/8. If you get to 20 cards in your trash, this is a 4/10. And that becomes rapidly hard for your opponent to deal with by battle, and being immune to KO by effects, and being able to turn off your opponent's on-plays, makes it incredibly difficult to do anything to this Jesus Burgess. He kind of sits there, gets large, and then towards the end of the game, this is just a 4/10, which is crazy. So how are we going to make him big? Well, that's sort of where our searchers come in. We've got Lafitte. He's a top 5 tap searcher for Blackbeard Pirates. This is going to take a little bit of aggression out of your opponent, because they've got to deal with this Lafitte, and going to give you more search to dig towards your power cards. And we have the stage. This is the main trash builder for this build. In Constructed, there's a 1-cost event that looks at the top 3 for Blackbeard Pirates, and then trashes the 2 that you don't choose. We don't have that in this sealed deck, but the Fuller Lead is still a really good option. It's a 1-cost stage, and every turn you can trash 1, rest the stage, look at the top 3 for a Blackbeard Pirate. So build your trash by 1, and gets you a search in the top 3 for anything in your deck. This can even grab itself, which is really nice. So what are we really trying to do with this deck? Well, we're trying to KO our opponent's characters with effects. And we've got 2 guys that say KO. First up, we got Doc Q. He's a 2/0/1k. Activate main, you can rest this character. If your leader has the Blackbeard Pirates type, KO one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 1 or less. Then on KO, and you'll get to notice this a lot, you draw a card. So this is a running theme with a lot of the Blackbeard cards. When they are KO'd, either that's by an effect or by battle, you get to draw 1, so they replace themselves in hand, which is incredibly important because your leader effect mandates trashing 1 on a fair amount of turns. Dot Q sticking on the board always presents your opponent with a tough question, because if they were attacking to Dot Q, he will die. However, you get to draw a card, and that attack then didn't go into your life, so you get further down the game. However, if you leave Dot Q on the board, he's going to KO something again next turn. The new card we have as an extra remover along with Dot Q is this 7-cost Blackbeard. He's a 7/8 with the Activate main, rest this character, KO 3. And this can actually be your own 3 as well. So if you just need to draw a card, you could KO something like a Dot Q to activate its on KO effect. But more often than not, this is going to be targeting your opponent and going to let you KO one of their 3s. And also on KO, this guy doesn't just draw a card, this adds any black card from your trash to your hand, which is nuts. This can grab blockers, 2Ks, reducers, more KO options, anything you could possibly need, Blackbeard will get it if your opponent decides to take him out. But you might be wondering, Dot Q KOs a 1, Blackbeard KOs a 3, they're not very big characters. Well, that's where the reduction comes in. The most important reduction piece for this deck is Van Augur. He's a 5/6 1k with Activate main, rest this character if your leader is a Blackbeard pirate, give something -3. So this combos with Dot Q to hit a 4, and with Teach to hit a 6. And 4 and 6 are very important breakers for a lot of these decks, as you'll see, if you've seen the other deck breakdowns. And you can even stack multiple Van Augurs. If you have 2 on board, Dot Q's hitting a 7, and Blackbeard's hitting a 9, which is kind of crazy. And also on KO, he draws a card. So even if your opponent decides we've got to get rid of this Van Augur, well, you're going to get a little bit of sugar back on the clapback when he goes down. In terms of other reduction, in Constructed, we have much more options. However, in this format, we don't have as many. We do, however, have 4 Stronger, who's one of our 2Ks. You can play him, and then Activate main, trash 1 card and this character. Then you draw 1 card and give something -2. So in a clutch situation, this can combine with Van Augur and Dot Q to remove a 6. If there's, for example, 6 you really need to get rid of. And can also combo with Teach for higher values. We also have Katarina Devon, who's a 1/1 2k. This is a new card. Activate main, you can trash his character if your leader is a Blackbeard pirate. Give something -1. So this is very similar to Stronger, just kind of worse. However, on KO, you do get to draw a card. I'm not really sure when this is going to come up, because when you use her Activate main, that's trashing, which is not the same as KOing. So I'm not sure when she's drawing a card exactly in a game, but, you know, it's there. This is the card that I think is likely to be a 2 of. A lot of the time, they like to make a 2k if it's a new card, a 2 of. So that's my reasoning for Katarina Devon. And we'll talk about the last 2k now as we've gone over the other 6, which is Shiryu. He's a 3/4 2k. Next time when attacking, you may trash 2 cards from your hand, draw 2. Gives you a nice cycle, but you're never really going to be thrilled to play out a 3/4 2k. I feel like I'd rather be doing a lot of other things. But you know, Shiryu, he's not the worst. Let's talk about this guy. This is Avalo Pizarro. He's a 1/1 1k. Activate main once per turn. You can rest one of your full lead cards, which is a reminder that's the stage. And then if your leader is a Blackbeard pirate, he gains 4,000 power for the turn, becoming a 5k. So you can swing, for 1 Don, you can swing 5 into your opponent. This does unfortunately mean that you won't get to activate full lead's effect, because it will already be rested by Avalo Pizarro's effect, so you can't rest it for its search effect. However, getting to swing 5 for 1 Don, it's not bad. And on KO, again, this guy draws a card, helping you with your card efficiency. This Blackbeard deck, I think, is going to be very consistent. My main concern is, I don't think you quite have enough reduction in KO. A lot of these cards are somewhat underwhelming. In terms of blockers, we've got quite a nice suite. We've got 4 of the Vasco Shot, he's just a simple 2/2 chump blocker. You've got 4 of the San Juan Wolf, this is a new card. 4/6 1k. On play, trash 1, but that doesn't fire because of our leader effect. And then, if your leader is a Blackbeard pirate, this character gains blocker, and +1 cost for every 4 cards in your trash. I don't think the plus cost is going to matter very much. Could come up into a couple of key cards, like Ashura Demon 9 Flash, but really not the biggest deal. However, gaining blocker is very good. 4/6 blocker is a great stat line. Being able to block 5s for free, which is always good. And this is even a decent body to start swinging with. One of your better attackers outside of the Jesus Burgess. And the last new card that we need to talk about is this Kuzan. He's a 6/6 1k blocker. On KO, play one Blackbeard Pirates type character with a cost of 5 or less from your trash rested. In Constructed, this card is a menace because it summons 5 cost Kuzan who combos into something else and draws a card. It's crazy. In Sealed, it's not so good. It summons realistically mostly Burgess. Can also summon San Juan Wolf or Venorga if you need a different option, if you need a blocker or some removal for the next turn. And this will be likely blocking at the end of your opponent's turn on their last swing, so that that tapped character that you summon in can get a bit of value at least, and it's not going to be wiped out. Card is good, only a 2 of, but you do have good consistency for it. However, I don't think the power play is anywhere near as high in this format as it is in Constructed. Last card, 5/7 San Juan Wolf. He's fine. He's a big vanilla. It's probably your second best attacker after the Jesus Burgess, which is a little bit underwhelming, but here we are. Overall, I think Blackbeard is going to require a really skilled player to get value out of him. And I do wonder if this deck has the legs to go the distance without that 10-12 Blackbeard blocker. In the games where you didn't get to your 10 on turn, you were generally losing. So without that, I'm a little dubious, but I do think Blackbeard could be an incredibly powerful play if you can pilot him well. And last, but certainly not the least, we have Green-Yellow Yamato. The Green-Yellow Yamato leader has double attack built in, which lends itself to an incredibly aggressive playstyle, almost hyper-aggressive. With a crazy amount of trigger bodies, your opponent is not going to know what's hit them. So the strategy of the Yamato deck is to use the power of your leader's innate ability to do double attack, to pressure your opponent down to 3 lives as soon as possible, to both turn on the second part of your leader's effect, which if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, you can give 2 rested Dons to one of your characters, giving you an extra 2,000 swing for free, and to turn on triggers. This deck has 26 triggers that say play this character, which is kind of crazy. Let's start off going through all the trigger characters. The one you might be most familiar with is Kikunojo. She's a 4/6 trigger play if they have 3 or less. I'm not going to repeat the trigger every time, but on KO, if your opponent has 3 or less life cards, you get a heal. This is nice for sort of lengthening the game, and it's going to be a target that your opponent's really not going to want to take out, especially in this sealed environment, because that life that you heal is probably going to be another trigger. So Kikunojo has great power, and your opponent is disincentivized from taking her out, which is strong. Inuarashi is a little bit weaker. He's a 4/5 1k. He has Donix 2 when attacking. You can trash 1 card from your hand, KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal or less to the number of your opponent's life cards. So realistically, this is going to be 3. So you're trashing 1 card to KO like a jump blocker, but that's not bad. For an aggressive deck, KOing something like a Vasco shot blocker or a Bedge blocker, it's not bad, right? And if your opponent does counter out early and you develop this Inuarashi early, well, maybe you'll be able to kill a 5 cost, which is pretty good. Next up, we've got Nekomamushi. He's a 4/5 1k with Donix 2. This character can also attack active characters. So if you need to go for a bit of a starve strategy, if your opponent's got some sort of really scary character that you need to take out immediately, Nekomamushi can help you get there. We've also got 5/6 Brick Denjiro. He has Donix 2 if your opponent has 3 or less life cards. This character cannot be KO'd by effects. Not the biggest deal in this sealed format, but could come up into Teach. We also have Kawamatsu. He's a 3/5 brick, and when attacking, you can trash 2 cards from your hand to add one of your characters with 0 power to the top of your life, or bottom. This only targets the Searcher that we'll cover later in this deck, so it's not really reliable, but even just having a 3/5 trigger body, it's pretty good. Next up, we've got 3/4 Raizo. He's a 1k, and when attacking, you can trash 1 card to rest one of your opponent's Dons. Not crazy into most of these decks, however, into the purple-black Luffy, well, if they leave 1 open for Giant, Raizo can just deny that, which is incredible. Resting Dons is really good at the moment, just in Constructed, I'm not going to tell you you're going to play Raizo in Constructed, but it's a good effect, and in this Seal format, especially into Purple Black Luffy, could be pretty good too. Also into Bonney as well, this is a nice one. This will go off before they have the chance to use their leader effect. And the last trigger that we have is Kinemon. This is a 4-5-2k, no effect, but has that trigger once again. When your opponent's at 3 less life cards, you get to play them for free. And you can see just the volume of stuff that's going to come out of your life. It's pretty obnoxious for your opponent to deal with, and is really going to help you press the advantage. In terms of non-trigger characters, well, let's talk about 2Ks. We've got 4 of this Yamato. It's a 5-4 with Rush. Horrible stats, but Rush is not bad. On play, you look at your life cards, put 1 on top of your deck, and the rest in your life in any order. This can let you stack triggers, but generally this effect is just bad. It's like a downside. So this is not going to be a card you're excited to play. But I mean, it could be worse. We've also got 5-5-2k Ace. This is not searchable. This is just in there because for the lore flavor. And on play, if you have 2 or more rested characters, you can rest a 5. This can come up if you're going for game. You can swing with a couple of guys, and then if your opponent doesn't use their blockers early, you could play this Ace to deny one of their blockers, which could be pretty cool. And also just a 2k. Now, I said earlier we talk about this. Now, this is a new Wano Searcher, 101k Yamato. On play, look at the top 5, grab a Wano card with a cost of 2 or more, and add it to your hand. So, in this sealed format, this can search everything in your deck except the Ace that we just mentioned, and Blade Slice because it does cost 1. However, it's still very good. It gets whatever piece you need for that next turn. And then for Don X2 in your turn, this character can gain 3000 power. And do remember, your leader gives something to rested Don. So you could make a curve as early as 1 Don. If you play this card on 1, then on 3, you swing 8. If they take, they're going to be at 3 or less life because you've got double attack. And then you can put 2 Don on your Yamato and swing in for 5 already. Just a little bit of extra aggression out of your searchers is very powerful. And it forces your opponent to sort of deal with this. Otherwise, you're getting another swing of 5, which is pretty strong. The other SR in this deck is the 6-7 Kazuki Momonosuke. Your turn, if you have 2 or less life, your leader gains 1000 power. Really nothing crazy, but a little extra power. Never going to turn that down. And then activate main once per turn. You can return 2 of your currently given Don cards to your cost area and rest them. Then this character gains Rush and 1000 power for the turn. So this is a 6-8 Rush that sometimes gives your leader a little bit more power too. It's quite good. It's generically very strong. Both for sealed and for constructed, this is one of the best Rush options you've got in Yamato. Obviously, we have Hody Jones in constructed, but this alongside Hody Jones is going to give you even more aggression, which is pretty cool. And this cost for your activate main, it's not really a cost because your leader does that for free once you get below that threshold. The last new character we have is Ashura Doji. He's the 3-3-1k with the on play. If your leader has the Land of Wano type and your opponent has 3 or more life cards, KO one of your opponent's characters with a base cost of 5. So this is a 3 cost that KOs a 5, which is an incredibly efficient stat line, especially on a character. Like Finger Gun's good. That's a 4 cost event. Ashura Doji's a 3 cost character, so he has counter and he has power. However, once your opponent does go below 3 life, this is dead. So it's a bit of a gimmicky card almost. It's very, very good in the early game. But towards that later game, which is generally when Yamato is a little bit weaker, it's very poor. Obviously just does nothing once your opponent is below 3. Not really sure how I feel about this card for constructed, but for sealed, I can see you getting some pretty powerful turns out of this. Getting rid of your opponent's early plays, whilst developing a guy that, whilst not powerful, with your leader effect can swing for 5, it's not bad. And especially because it's 3 or more, not like more than 3, on that 3 life period, this is going to be a really powerful play. The actual last new character, almost forgot Izo, is Izo. 2-1-1k, Don X2, this character gains blocker, and remember that can be provided by your leader's effect. And then on play, your Land of Wano leader gains banish for the turn. Now, we've seen before with cards like Onami, double attack and banish together is incredibly obnoxious. Your opponent's going to lose 2 resources and 2 lives if they let that swing through. So it can force your opponent into some tricky situations. Izo, I think, is just a generically better version of Onami. It can become a blocker, which is quite nice, and it's searchable in archetype. So I do think Izo will see play in the Yamato deck, in Constructed. And for Sealed, if you can get a double attack banish swing off, man, you're cooking. That's crazy value. And even if you don't, if your opponent's got to give you like 3 or 4 cards, you're kind of cooking anyway. And the last card in the deck is Blaze Slice. This is a 1-cost event that can be used on main or counter. One of your characters or leaders gains 1,000 power for the turn. Then, if you have 2 or less life, you rest a 4. And the trigger rests a 4. So, this card is both good on defense when you need your opponent to have 1 less swing and your leader to become bigger for the turn, or on offense when you just want to rest a blocker and go for game. In Yamato, we're all about the aggression, so this more so comes up on offense. However, it is pretty nice that you can use this as a defensive tool too. Overall, I think the aggression offered by the combination of Yamato's innate strength as a leader, combined with some of these characters' effects and the fact that you have just quite so many triggers, is going to make Yamato a very, very obnoxious deck and a very, very powerful one for the sealed environment. I do think your matchup into Buggy will be quite bad. I mean, look at this deck, right? He's a 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4. Like, more than half your deck, what was this, 26 characters, cannot attack when 7-cost Buggy is on the board. Add in the Izo, who can't attack really anyway, the Yamato that you don't want to play, suddenly you're looking quite barren in terms of actual attackers, which is scary. And you have no way to deal with that Buggy once it comes on the board. You have no removal, nothing like that. But outside of Buggy, I think this deck could actually be quite strong. Bonney, maybe a little bit tough, but their deck kind of doesn't do anything. So even if they're sort of slowing you down, they're not getting anywhere. Because the deck's just kind of bad. So I do think Yamato is probably my number 2 pick for this event. And we'll cover the rankings just about now. And these are going to be my final rankings for these decks for both sealed and constructed. But you may be wondering why. Well, I've prepared a slide to sort of argue my case for these decks being in these ranks on each slide. And one thing I'm proud to say is, well done Bandai, you've not made a green Uta starter deck like last time. So all of the decks this time, I think, are at least decent. There's no stinkers in this wave, with the possibility of Bonney for sealed. It's a little bit of a stinker, but other than that, I think these decks all have cards that have merits. And all of them could be argued to be worth picking up at least, which is a breath of fresh air. No Uta, what a time to be alive. Let's move on. First up, we've got Shanks. I'm going to rank Shanks as 3rd for sealed and 6th for constructed. Shanks in sealed, you have generically one of the better leader effects of this bunch. Defensive leader effects are, of course, generically strong. Giving you a free 1k every turn is great in a format where decks are not going to be as consistent as they are in constructed. Increasing your power further with Yasop and Shanks, especially if you can chain those buffs, is going to give you even more defense, and cards like Yasop's when attacking, and even maybe that Ben Beckman, are going to make it easier for you to deal with your opponent's characters by either some removal or some power down when you attack. Lucky Roo is nuts. Lucky Roo is one of the best cards in this format. A blocker that can block any swings. It's relatively hard to deal with. There's not that much removal in this format. And even if they do remove it by KO, by like something like a Gum Gum Lightning or a Teach, something in there KOing, you still get to remove something, which is just nuts. A removal piece that's also a blocker. You cannot overstate how insane Lucky Roo is. It's great and constructed, and I see it being even better in this format. And there's really not that many bad cards in Shanks. Maybe Monster, but it's really only that 1-cost Luffy that's bad. Everything else in this deck, you'd at least be not upset to play out. However, for constructed, Luffy and Beckman are terrible. These are truly not good cards at all. 9-cost Shanks is a good effect. However, if your opponent is not playing 8,000 power characters, in the case of a deck like Green Purple Luffy, or just chooses to forgo them a turn in a deck like Blue Buggy. Well, it kind of doesn't do very much. When that Shanks costs 9, it's of course nowhere near as powerful as when it costs 6. So I'm still quite mixed on how good that Shanks is actually going to be in the meta. Uta is great if you do meet the condition, but if you don't, this card is awful. A 6/4 blocker is obviously very bad, and the fact that it's not even searchable does kind of suck. However, this does have a good amount of the cards you'd need for a constructed Shanks build. Not all, but if you want to go with like a Rayleigh list build that's less focused on removal and more focused on just like tempo, making your leader bigger, this is not a bad start. You've got the Lucky Roos, you've got the Yasops, you've got the 2Ks. You need to find some Uta searchers, but those cost pennies. And then you need a few SRs like the 10 cost Shanks and Ben Beckman. But this is a decent start. It's not a great start, but it is decent. However, I think Shanks looks quite underwhelming in OP11, and I say this as a massive Shanks fan. Throughout OP9 and OP10, I was like a very, very big fan of Shanks. I did Shanks Saturday. We played Shanks every single week. But in OP11, my early testing suggested it's not going to be great. However, I am really looking forward to seeing how that 9-cost Luffy especially can improve the Shanks deck into decks like Blue-Purple Luffy. None of the cards are splashable in anything really except Red-Purple Uta, and Red-Purple Uta is very, very much a rogue deck. I want to give it a try because it looks fun, but these cards are not splashable. 2 of them being horrific, the Uta and the Shanks being basically leader locked to Shanks and Red-Purple Uta. And then the Yasop is fairly unexciting. It's a decent card, but you're not going to play outside of this. And for those reasons, I've got Shanks in the middle of the pack for sealed. However, I think this is one of the most skippable decks for constructed. Next up, we've got Bonney. So Bonney in sealed, as you sort of worked out when I went through there, the leader effect is very strong. Getting out of 1 attack for free every turn is great. However, we have so few attackers, it really kind of sucks. You're going to end up attacking with your blockers, which is obviously not optimal because then they're not blockers and they may as well just be better characters. It's not amazing. However, you do have a very strong defense between your leader effect and the amount of blockers you play. 5-cost Luffy will be strong into Blackbeard because they do need to reduce to at least 3 to get any removal, especially in this format. So that card in particular will be very, very good into Blackbeard. Demon Ashura 9/ is going to be strong for going for game. However, you do need to stick a 3-cost, which is easier said than done. And lastly, this deck does have quite a few poor cards. The 1-cost Sorrow and the Korobu and the Caribou, to me, stick out. And saddeningly, the Caribou is actually one of your better cards, but it's not a good card. This deck has a lot of low-cost cards that kind of don't do very much. Very little top end outside of that Law and Beppo, which I think is a real shame. If this deck had like 1 to 2 more attackers, I genuinely think it could be quite a threat with the amount of blockers and amount of like extra hits you get out of with your leader effect. But because of that vacuum in what am I attacking with, I'm not excited for Bonney in sealed. However, in constructed, I think this one's actually pretty strong. A lot of the decks, if you wanted to build Bonney specifically, are missing. So this doesn't provide a great base to starting to build Bonney. You've got a Rouge. You don't even have the Body Searcher. You don't have Cavendish, of course. You don't have 8-cost Kid. It doesn't even have the Killer Blocker, who's quite popular. So you are missing quite a few cards. And obviously all those out-of-type cards like Cody Jones, 9-cost Shanks, 10-cost Dofi. They're all missing. However, this deck is like the opposite of Shanks. Where Shanks was like okay for Shanks, but really bad for everything else. Bonney is just generically quite good. A lot of her cards are going to breathe life into other green decks, which is really cool. Kid and Killer, great for green-yellow lore, and also maybe RG lore. Having that extra searcher that you can bounce with your lore's effects is going to make those decks more consistent. Lore and Beppo is a strong generic top end that's searchable in many decks. You could play it in green-yellow lore, although I don't personally think that one's going to be too strong. You can play it in Bonney, of course, and you can play it in Carrot. I'm especially excited to try that in Carrot, personally. However, I think the card is just generically good, and we may see it in future green decks because it's not locked to anything. The 2K is also major improvements on the previous Supernova and Slash 2Ks as we look ahead to Zoro in the OP12. The previous Supernova 2Ks we had were the Film Luffy from the Uta deck and 2 really bad Scratchman Apoos. Both the Basil Hawkins and the X-Drake are strong for both Bonney and Zoro, and even anything else that plays Supernovas could consider them, although in decks like Red-Green Law and Green-Yellow Law, we do have other options in their other colours, so, you know. Overall, I think Bonney is not going to be your best choice for sealed, because of that lack of attacking characters. However, full constructed, if you're someone who likes to have all the decks built, or all the decks available to them, this is going to be a really important one to pick up, because it's going to have key cards for like 3 or 4 different decks. Next up, and I might be coping, but I've got Buggy as first for both. Let's talk about sealed first. 10 cost Buggy, for this kind of format, coming out for 5 Don, is cracked. And you have 4 of them, and double searchers to get towards those Buggies. If you can establish your board, which with the lack of hard removal, and even the protection from Crockhawk, it's going to be, I think, fairly easy to do so. Playing out 10 cost Buggy is one of the very few ways in this format to deal with opposing boss monsters. Things like the 9 cost Shanks, things like the 7 cost Blackbeard, and it's even nice that into that Blackbeard, you don't trigger that on KO. Of course, they can turn off your on-plays with their leader effect, which is something to consider, but if they don't, it's a really nice effect. The 7 cost Buggy is obnoxious. Like, that card in Constructed is very good into decks like Bello Betty or Zoro, but in this format, I mean, you saw that Yamato list, right? This turns off like over half the deck. They have so many 3s and 4s that are coming out of trigger, and if you get this 7 cost Buggy down, Buggy just doesn't care. He just is like, nice Kiku Nojo, bro. And there's so few ways, really, in this format to deal with that 7 cost Buggy once it hits the board. It's just kind of tough. Also, into Blackbeard, denying Burgess. It's like, what is Blackbeard actually doing into Buggy? Without access to Burgess to apply pressure, you're just a removal deck, and Buggy has Crockhawk, so if they can get that down, and also all their characters are just large, so I really think Buggy could be strong into Blackbeard. Crockhawk is great into any removal if you can find him. There's not much outside of Blackbeard that's going to remove your stuff, maybe Gum Gum Lightning, but even into that, getting Crockhawk down, it's pretty good. You've got good consistency. You've got 8 searchers, 4 of the event and 4 of the Mr. 3, and then you've also got 2 cards in the Alvida and the Crockhawk that are going to draw you extra cards. Not as consistent as it will be in Constructed, obviously, it's a sealed deck tournament. However, I think Buggy is going to be on the more consistent end of the decks. However, you do also have to assemble that combo to get your 10 cost Buggy off. So, it's not going to be free, but I think it's going to be reasonable, especially because all these other decks are a little bit slower too, right? And the 2Ks, in the Moji and the Cabbagey, the new ones, that are blockers, it's just double value. It's great. Playing out your 2Ks is something that if you can feel good about playing out your 2Ks, that's like a nice little buff for a deck, right? Cards like the One-Legged Toy Soldier, the 4-cost Chopper, these are like 2Ks that you're somewhat excited to play out because their effects are strong. And Buggy has that in spades. 2 blockers that are also 2Ks. It's no joke. For Constructed, I may be coping that from my early testing and theory crafting, I think Buggy could be tier 1, or at least the top of tier 2. You've got the 7 cost Buggy to deal with the aggro decks in Betty and Zoro, which are very popular in this format. You've got the 10 cost Buggy to deal with top end, which is like Blue Purple Luffy. Of course, you're going to struggle to play 2 Buggies a turn, but even just removing one of their dudes and then having a 10-12 is pretty good value. And the 7 cost Buggy, even in that matchup, denying things like Zoro and Bonclay from attacking, is great. Crockhawk is great for your removal matchups, your Lucci, your Teach, things like that. If you can get him down, and he's an 8 cost, so he's pretty hard to remove himself, you can really just deny their decks from doing anything, which is pretty cool. The one deck that does make me a little bit scared is Green-Purple Luffy. We're not great at answering Sanji and Puddings, so if they can get a couple of those to stick, that could be pretty backbreaking. And that's why I've got 2 Raging Tigers in my build. If you saw my post from a couple of days ago, you'll have seen my early Buggy build. But anyway, even if this is just like a tier 2 deck, this has almost all the cards you'll need to build your Buggy deck. You need to pick up the Crocodiles from set 9. You also need to pick up the Mihawks from set 9. And you may be needing to pick up EBO1 Mr. 1s, as well as potentially Red Rocks or Raging Tigers. However, this is like 35 cards of your Buggy deck right here, including the promo, which is a big reprint, because that was like £4-5 when it was seeing no play. And if they started seeing play and didn't include the promo Buggy, that could have been a really tough time. However, if you're not a Buggy fan, these cards are not splashable. These cards work with Buggy and not really anything else. So if you're not planning on playing Buggy, no matter how good he is, this is entirely skippable, to be fair. 4-cost Buggy seems bad. Just due to lack of targets, you really only have that 6-cost Mihawk that it's worth playing out. But all 4 of the other cards seem strong, and I think 4 out of 5, that's a pretty good hit rate. Purple Black Luffy's up next, and for Sealed, I'm giving this 5th, and Constructed, I'm giving this 4th. Let's talk about Sealed. The 6-cost Luffy is insane. So cheap to make your leader become 7k turn after turn. You're going to get some crazy value out of that 6-cost Luffy if you can find it. And that's the thing. There's no searchers in this deck, and there's only 2 6-cost Luffys. So if your opponent is able to deal with it, be that by battle, hard removal, however it may be, or if you just don't find it to begin with, this deck's quite weak. You've got 12 vanillas, which is just diabolical. Every other deck has 8 or fewer vanillas, and they gave Luffy 12. Vanillas aren't bad, but they're also not good, and the Sober Mask is effectively a vanilla as well. It's a vanilla with slight upside, but also slight downside. You be the judge. Also, just being a 4-life leader is tough. It means you have 1 less resource, and of course, 1 less life, which can make it easier for your opponent to aggro you down. However, the defense that we have between that 6-cost Luffy and Gum Gum Giant does make me think he'll have a chance. Gum Gum Giant is such an unbalanced card that it could make any pile playable, and I think that will be true for Purple Black Luffy as well. I don't think he's going to be the strongest, but if you get that 6-cost Luffy, high roll on this deck is crazy. For Constructed, I'm giving this 4th. The 6-cost Luffy and the 3-cost Robin are both very important pieces for Purple Black Luffy. The Luffy is your, that's your build around, that's your guy. You make your leader 7k for the whole game. You play 4 of him, you fill your deck with ways to find him, and you ramp to get to him early, and you're cooking. The 3-cost Robin as redundancy for your 3-cost Zoro, as well as a really nice 2k that you're quite excited to play out, is a good card. It's nothing game-changing, but it is very good for your consistency. However, the rest of the cards are a little bit underwhelming. Both the Sober Mask, the General Frankie, and the Chopper, I all think are unlikely to see play. And this deck is missing a lot of key pieces from Purple Black Luffy. However, the reason I've got this in 4th and not lower is that I think there's a chance that this Purple Black Luffy becomes a top deck, maybe near the top of tier 2. I don't think this will make him tier 1 from my early testing. However, I think tier 2 seems very plausible, which, you know, for a deck that was seeing no play before, that's a pretty decent buff. Next up, we've got Black Teach, and for Sealed, I'm going to give him a 4th, and Constructed will give 2nd. So, Sealed, removal effects are very strong. However, you only have 4 KO options, that's the Doc Qs and the 7-cost Teach. And you also only have limited reductions, that's the 4 Van Augers, and then around 6 2Ks, depending on which cards are 2 of. The Katarina Devon's reduction is also exceptionally weak, and there are some cards in this format that you might not want to KO, like Kikunojo, or against Buggy, you might not be able to KO anything. Denying on plays is a mixed bag. Into some decks, it's going to be great. Into others, it's not going to do anything. Into Yamato in particular, most of their cards have when attacking effects. There's not many on plays. So your effects are not going to be great into them. And if you attack them, well, they're just going to go trigger, 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 which is tough. Also, you just having naturally a lower amount of cards in your hand, because you want to turn off on plays potentially, is going to make their double attack rough to deal with. And every deck having just vanilla cards, it's like if you have a key turn, you turn off their on plays, and then they just go, I didn't have it anyway, and then they play a vanilla. It doesn't feel great, right? Vanilla's a larger card that are harder for you to deal with, so it's not as free as it is in Constructed. 7-cost Sober Mask and an early 10-cost Buggy are also pretty major punishes for overuse of your leader effect. Sober Mask coming down for 2 if they have a Sangoro, and then not picking up said Sangoro is obviously very broken. And 10-cost Buggy coming down on 5 and not leaving, because his condition doesn't fire if you use your leader effect. A 10, you're not dealing with a 10-12. Like, you're not realistically removing that, and it's just going to hit you for 1 damage every single turn, which is obviously not ideal. And against Buggy in particular, you kind of have to use your leader effect, because otherwise they summon 2 guys. There's kind of a double-edged sword into Buggy. This will also require a very skilled player to know what to expect. So if you're a bit more of a newer player, I would advise against playing Blackbeard. Build the deck, play it for standard, but in sealed in particular, it's a completely different ball game. All these decks are doing things that they might not be doing in standard. Shanks, for example, has shed loads of on-plays in standard, but in sealed, a lot of the cards are like vanillas or cards that they're not that upset about not getting the on-plays for. Jesus Burgess, whilst he will be smaller than in constructed, due to no This Is My Age and no Finger Gun, he's still going to be a pretty crazy big guy that is immune to KO effects. Burgess, still going to be a menace. And I do think Blackbeard has a decent chance if you can pilot it well and see those key cards when you need. But we do, again, have 8 searchers, so he should be consistent at least. For constructed, other than 5-cost Kuzans, Finger Guns, and 10-cost Teach, this has pretty much everything you would need for your Blackbeard constructed deck. So if you buy 2 copies of this and spend like $20, you've got a Blackbeard deck. Brilliant. And Blackbeard looks strong in OP11 even before this deck. He was one of the better decks. And cards like the 7-cost Blackbeard and the 6-cost Kuzan are only going to be buffs, right? They're either going to not see play or be buffs. And personally, I think the 6-cost Kuzan is incredible. The 6-cost Kuzan, blocking a swing, because he's a blocker. Then at the end of your opponent's turn, you block the last swing, summon the 5-cost Kuzan. Then the 5-cost Kuzan can draw a card, cycle out, get a free 5k swing in, and then turn into something scary like a Jesus Burgess. Which is just incredibly efficient, especially for your card economy. 7-cost Teach is also likely strong. We've seen Jack see play in Blackbeard, and Teach is just searchable Jack with some slightly different effects. But definitely better than Jack because you can find him for all your searchers. He also may be useful in decks like Lucci as a 5th copy of Jack, or even an alternative to Jack. I'm not convinced Jack is just better just yet. I do want to test both, and once we do, that'll be pretty interesting. Katarina Devon is likely better than Shiryu, but it's not a major upgrade. Pizarro is an interesting option for some aggression, but I'm not sure how much room there is in your Blackbeard list for a card like that. San Juan is likely not good, but having like 3 out of 5, maybe 4 out of 5 be hits, it's not bad. I will say though, again, if you're not a Blackbeard player, you can obviously skip this, except for maybe that Teach. These cards are not splashable, but it is worth noting the Teach could be a Lucci option. And last up, we've got Yamato. So Yamato, I'm going to give 2nd for sealed, but 5th for constructed. In sealed, this deck has 26 characters that have trigger play if your opponent has 3 or less life. It's going to be very, very important to get a swing through to get your opponent down to that threshold so that your characters trigger out. However, that's kind of Yamato's thing anyway. She wants your opponent at 3 anyway for her leader effect, and double attack is going to get you there in 1 swing. The fact that there's a 50-50 chance that each of your lives is a trigger body is incredibly obnoxious for your opponent to have to deal with, and is going to enable you to extend your aggressive lead early and potentially get to the end before your opponent even gets to their late game. Double attack early in the game always goes hard. Normally just swinging 8 on 3 is a play that nobody's that excited to do. For Yamato, that's a banger. That's 8 double attack, and if your opponent takes, which they're not really going to want to counter that this early, well, they're now at 3, your triggers are live, the second part of your leader effect is live, you're cooking. Bonney, however, may be a pretty tough matchup. Bonney plays a lot of blockers, and whilst Yamato does have ways to rest blockers, or deal with them, with cards like the Flame Split and the Inuarashi, it's still not ideal. You don't love having to deal with these cards, especially without Hody Jones to clean up the game, like you would in Constructed. So it could be a little bit of a tough matchup. But luckily, I don't think Bonney's that good. 7-cost Buggy is brutal, though. There's 26 of your cards cannot attack when 7-cost Buggy is on the board, including the majority of your trigger bodies, which is not helpful. You do still have some attackers into Buggy, cards like the Denjiro and the new 6-cost Momo. but it certainly doesn't help. One nice thing, though, is you don't really care about teach effects. There's not many on plays in this deck. You have a few, like Ashura Doji, but most of your trigger bodies don't have on plays. They just do something when attacking, or have on KO effects or static effects, like Kikunojo or Nekomamushi. So teach is turning off your on plays. It's nice for you because you don't care, but it's also kind of nice for them that they won't have to trash cards, if they're smart players. You are a full life leader, which will hurt you in the same way it'll hurt Purple Black Luffy. However, Yamato is way more aggressive. So I think it definitely doesn't hurt Yamato as much, because you don't want the game to go on forever. Luffy is a deck with Gum Gum Giants and things that you want the game to be long. Yamato wants the game to end quickly anyway, so the fact that you're 4 life versus being 5 life, it's not the biggest deal, although it does mean you'll get 1 less trigger. It's a bit of a shame. For Constructed, the main reason I've got this so low is I just don't think Yamato is going to be that competitive. It's never really been a top deck. Even back when it came out, it was okay. You had like the aggro Wano build and you had the Fortress build. And they were both okay, but neither of them were anywhere near top tier. And times have kind of moved on. We're playing a lot of blockers and a lot of counter events at the minute. Although that does mean that Hody Jones is an incredible card. Anything green that gets to play Hody, there's always something to be said there. So let's talk about it in a bit more depth. The Yamato Searcher is really nice. You've now got 2 good searchers. You've got the Momo, you've got the Yamato. You've also got the 2K Otama, but it only searches green cards, and a lot of this deck's cards now are going to be yellow. This deck has a good amount of a green-yellow Yamato deck. Cards like Kikunojo, Nekomamushi, you're likely to be playing these. The new cards seem broadly good, so you'll be playing those. And the only real card that is mandatory to add, in my opinion, is the Hody Jones, and probably the 5-cost Momo from set 6. Outside of that, you've got a lot of flexibility because your leader effect is so generic. You can include more of these starter deck cards, or you can include other cards that you like from previous sets. 6-cost Momo is generically strong for this deck in a way similar to how the 6-cost Yamato was for RG Odin. We saw that card sort of breathe a breath of fresh air into Odin. And whilst I do think Odin's leader effect is a little stronger, personally, Yamato's leader effect is good, and this Momo giving your leader a bit of extra power, and just being a really good stat-lined rusher himself, is going to increase Yamato's aggression naturally. Kinemon and Izo are not the craziest cards in the world, but they are searchable upgrades on both Satori and Onami. I think the Kinemon is just a nice piece. It's just a good 2k that says trigger play. Nothing to say. Izo, being a version of Onami that then turned into a blocker, is pretty cool. Especially if you play it early. Maybe on like 4 Don, you can play it, swing in for 7, and then if your opponent takes, they've taken a banish 7, and then you can use your leader effect immediately to put those Dons on your Izo to make her a blocker straight away. Not bad. Ashura Doji could go either way. I'm not sold on this card yet. The effect is strong, but the fact that it's not live at the end of the game makes it significantly weaker at that point than something like the Egghead Nami that just can remove a blocker towards the end of the game. Doji helps you with controlling the board early on against things like Sanji Puddings, but he's not going to help you at all at the end of the game, which is when you may need him the most. Although we do have other closers like Hody, so he might make the cut anyway. We'll just have to see. Like I said, the main reasons this is 5th is, like Buggy and Teach, the cards are not splashable. These really are just Yamato cards. A lot of them are locked to being Wano, so it's not amazing. And also, I just don't think Yamato, personally, is going to be top tier. I could be wrong, and then everyone will be rushing out to buy this deck, but unfortunately, I'm afraid I'm just not a Yamato believer. It's always been a little too flimsy and easy to answer for me. So, final conclusions. This is not financial advice, but personally, if you have the funds, just buy 2 of each. If you can get them for retail, that is. These retail for $12 or £12 in the UK or the US, respectively. And once you take out the pack of OP11 that's included, that's a $5 or £5 retail price. You're paying £7 or dollars for the brick of cards. $7 or pounds for 4 SRs and then a bunch of other cards. I just think it's a good price, right? You're paying less than $2 or pounds for each SR, which if they were coming from a set, you'd be pretty happy with that. And you get all those other cards as well, which especially if you're a beginner, are going to help you build these decks just more easily. However, for a more interesting answer, if you're on a budget, For me, if you're like just a meta player, Buggy and Teach I think are mandatory to pick up. I think both of those decks are going to have a lot of potential. We know Teach is guaranteed to be a top deck in this format. Buggy, it's my cope, but I really do think he could be strong. Some of those cards, man, I don't know. I've talked about it already. However, if you don't like Buggy or you don't like Teach, no matter how strong they are, you don't need to pick them up. They're not really flexible outside of that 7-cost Teach, but you might be better off just buying those as singles if you're not a Teach player. Bonney is support for like 3 or 4 different decks. It's not really focused on Bonney herself, which is a little bit of a shame. And as a result, if you are just planning to play green-yellow lore or Bonney or Carrot, you may well be best off just picking up the cards that go in that deck because you won't need everything and you may be able to get them cheaper. However, if you like having lots of different green decks available to you, just pick it up at 2 of. It's going to help you build Carrot, help you build green-yellow lore, probably help you build Bonney, and looking ahead to Zoro will help you build that too with those 2Ks. So it's certainly not a bad one to pick up. Shanks, I'm sort of on the fence. If 9-cost Shanks is good, the 9-cost Shanks will likely be more expensive to buy 2 copies than just buying the deck, because the rest of the cards are so mid. If 9-cost Shanks is not good, then the Shanks one is completely skippable. Yamato is a very nice buff for Yamato in the same way that Buggy and Teach are a buff for Buggy and Teach. The cards are not splashable. However, for the meta fans, I just don't think Yamato is going to be meta. So if you're not a Yamato fan, I think this is skippable. However, if you're a Yamato enjoyer, I'd definitely pick up 2 of these. Purple Black Luffy is, again, and you could sort of see a theme with these decks. They all sort of support their leader fairly well, but a lot of the cards are not splashable. Purple Black Luffy, if you're a Purple Black Luffy fan, is good. 6-cost Luffy, no doubt, will make that deck so much stronger than it was before. And the Robin is also a nice consistency piece. However, 3 of the cards being pretty bad, and the Luffy and Robin not being very splashable outside Purple Black Luffy, the Luffy, maybe you'll see it in the Nico Robin leader. But other than that, these cards really aren't splashable. So I think this is definitely potentially a skip if you're just a meta player, depending on how strong the Purple Black Luffy leader is with these new cards. So thank you for watching my video. If there was anything you think I missed, please leave it in the comments below to help out other players. I want as many of us as possible to win these sealed battle events, get those bulk boxes, and the new exclusive promos, which are really cool. Good luck at your event. I hope you get something crazy out of your booster pack. Have fun. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.